Last week we covered the era of the Judges. This week we're going to start with a book. It's kind of a standalone book in the Bible. It's called Ruth. It's about the book of Ruth. And it kind of is a transition sort of from the era of the Judges to the era of the human kings of Israel. Before this, God was the only king of Israel, but we'll see the people asked for a human king so they could be like their pagan neighbors that all had human kings. And eventually God relented and allowed them to have them. And Ruth is kind of a transition because the book of Ruth takes place during the time of Judges, but the events in the life of Ruth really have nothing to do with any of the Judges. And as you'll see, Ruth will become the great-grandmother of King David and the grandmother of King David's father, Jesse. So let's get started with the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth takes place during the time of Judges. Now, during the time when the Judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. There was a family consisting of a father named Elimelech, a mother named Naomi, and two sons named Mahlon and Chilion. They were from Bethlehem in the land of Judah, but they moved to the country of Moab. While in Moab, Elimelech the father died. Naomi's two sons later got married. Their wives' names were Oprah and Ruth. Within 10 years of living in the country of Moab, both of Naomi's sons died. Now the mother-in-law, Naomi, and both daughters-in-law, Oprah and Ruth, were all widows. And you can read that in Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. Now Naomi heard that the Lord had visited her people back in her home of Judah and had given them food. She and her two daughters-in-law set out to move back to Judah because of this. Naomi instructed her daughters-in-law, Oprah and Ruth, to return to the homes of their original families. They were from the country of Moab, which they were now leaving. They refused, choosing to remain living with Naomi. Naomi pleaded with them to return to her families. She told them that she has no more sons, and if they stayed with her, they would deprive themselves of having a husband and children for the rest of their lives. They're all sad about this. Oprah decided to leave her mother-in-law, Naomi, and return home to her original family. Ruth, however, was determined to remain living with Naomi as a daughter of hers. Ruth was a Moabite and told Naomi that Naomi's people, who were the Israelites living in Judah, would become her people, and Naomi's God would become Ruth's God. When Naomi saw Ruth's determination to remain with her, she allowed it. You read that in Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 to 18. So Naomi and Ruth returned to Naomi's home in Bethlehem. A relative of Naomi's deceased husband was a worthy man named Boaz. One day, Ruth was gleaning ears of grain in the field that belonged to Boaz. Boaz took a liking to Ruth, and he was very kind to her as his servant. Upon Naomi's suggestion, Ruth asked Boaz if he could be her redeemer, since he was in position to be. Boaz told her he would like to be her redeemer, but there was one man whose position to do so was ahead of his. If the other man was willing to redeem her, Ruth would need to go with him. But if he was not willing to redeem her, Boaz would in fact redeem her. You read that in Ruth chapter 2, verses 1 to 23, and in chapter 3, verses 11 to 8. So Boaz approached this other man and explained the situation regarding Ruth about redeeming her. The other man said, "I cannot redeem her for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem her." Boaz then took Ruth as his wife. Naomi was very happy with this. Ruth could have left and returned to her home of Moab when she became a widow. But she loved Naomi, and she became like a daughter to Naomi. Ruth and Boaz had a son who they named Obed. Naomi now happily had a grandson, but Obed was no ordinary grandson. He became the father of Jesse, who became the father of David, who would become the greatest king in the history of Israel. You can read that in Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 to 22. One of David's descendants, who was also one of Obed's descendants, and therefore Ruth's descendants, would be Jesus Christ. None of this would have happened if Ruth did not decide to stay with Naomi when their husbands died and become a daughter to her. So now we're moving into the stories of Israel's first kings. Again, before this, God was Israel's king, and they decided they wanted human kings. Now, what I'm going to read